The ballroom shimmered under golden chandeliers as applause rolled across the room like thunder. Cameras flashed. Waiters paused mid-step. On the stage, one man stood at the center of it all. David Okoye, a self-made African billionaire, a man newspapers called the symbol of modern success. Tonight, he was receiving another award, another reminder that the world believed his story was perfect. The host praised his empire. The crowd clapped louder. But in the back of the room, someone wasn't applauding. A young woman stood perfectly still among the guests. Her eyes were locked on David, not with admiration, with something colder, something heavier, something that had been waiting a very long time. David didn't notice her, not yet, because what no one in that room knew was that the girl watching him had waited 22 years for this moment. 22 years of questions, 22 years of silence, and tonight, she was finally about to confront the man who had abandoned her life before it even began.
For most people in that ballroom, David Okoye was more than just a successful businessman. He was a legend. Born and raised in Lagos, Nigeria, David had risen from a modest childhood to build one of the most powerful technology empires in Africa. By the time he reached his early 40s, his companies operated across multiple continents, with offices in Lagos, Atlanta, and Johannesburg. His name appeared regularly on business magazine covers, often beside headlines that called him Africa's self-made billionaire. To the public, his story was the perfect blueprint for success: discipline, vision, relentless ambition. Television interviews praised his intelligence. Financial analysts studied his strategies. Young entrepreneurs across Africa saw him as proof that anything was possible. At charity galas, David donated millions to education programs. At global conferences, he spoke about innovation and leadership. And on social media, photos of his luxury lifestyle, private jets, waterfront penthouses, and exclusive business summits only strengthened his reputation as a man who had built everything from nothing. But behind every powerful story, there are chapters the world never sees. Because while David Okoye had built his empire on discipline, strategy, and ambition, he had also built it on forgetting. For 22 years, he had buried one decision deep in his past, one mistake he had convinced himself would never return, one mistake connected to a woman and a child he chose to leave behind.
22 years earlier, long before the headlines, the private jets, and the billion-dollar empire, David Okoye was just another ambitious university student in Lagos. Back then, his world was much smaller. No bodyguards, no luxury cars, no business empire. Just a young man with big dreams and a relentless determination to escape the life he had grown up in. And during those university years, there was someone who shared those dreams with him. Her name was Amara. Amara was everything David was not. Calm where he was intense, patient where he was restless. She believed in people. She believed in loyalty. And most importantly, she believed in David long before the world ever noticed him. Their love grew quietly between late-night study sessions, small cafes near campus, and long walks through the busy streets of Lagos. They talked about the future constantly. David dreamed of building companies that would change Africa. Amara dreamed of building a life beside him. For a while, it felt like nothing could separate them. But ambition has a way of changing people. As graduation approached, David's focus sharpened. Investors, business competitions, and startup opportunities began pulling him in different directions. The future he imagined demanded sacrifices, and slowly their once simple relationship began to feel complicated. Then one evening, everything changed. Amara asked to meet him at a quiet park near the university. Her voice was nervous. Her hands trembled slightly. And when David finally arrived, she looked at him with a mixture of fear and hope. That was when she told him she was pregnant. For a moment, the world around David seemed to stop. His mind raced, not with excitement, but with fear. Fear that a child would destroy the career he was just beginning to build. Fear that responsibility would trap him before his dreams even started. Fear that everything he had worked for could collapse before it ever began. Amara searched his face for reassurance, for support, for the love she had always believed in. But the reaction she saw instead was hesitation, then silence, and eventually distance. David told her he needed time to think. He promised he would come back with a solution. He promised he would handle everything. But that night, David Okoye walked away, and he never returned. Because promises are easy to make when you never plan to keep them.
After David disappeared from her life, Amara quickly realized something painful. She was completely alone. The phone calls stopped, the messages were never answered, and the man who once promised her the world had simply vanished. At first, she tried to believe he would come back. Days passed, then weeks. Eventually, the truth became impossible to ignore. David Okoye was gone, and Amara was left to face the future alone, carrying a child that the world would constantly remind her she had no right to raise by herself. The judgment came quickly. Neighbors whispered behind closed doors. Relatives asked uncomfortable questions. Some people told her she had ruined her life, but Amara refused to give up. Months later, in a small hospital on the edge of the city, she gave birth to a baby girl. She named her Zara. From that moment on, Zara became the center of her entire world. But love alone could not make life easy. Amara worked wherever she could find a job, cleaning offices at night, serving food in crowded cafes during the day, taking small sewing jobs at home just to earn a little extra money. Some days she barely slept, but every sacrifice had a purpose: to give Zara a chance at a better life. As the years passed, Zara grew into a curious and intelligent child. She asked questions about everything, about school, about the world, about the future, and sometimes she asked about her father. Each time the question came, Amara's heart tightened, because no matter how much time passed, the truth still carried too much pain. So she gave Zara simple answers, careful answers, answers that never told the full story. Zara grew up believing her father had simply been someone who was no longer part of their lives. But there was one thing Amara never threw away: not the letters, not the memories, and most importantly, not his name. Because even after all those years, Amara had kept one secret hidden away: the name of the man who had walked away from them, David Okoye. By the time Zara reached her teenage years, she had already learned something about life. Nothing came easy. She had watched her mother work long hours. She had seen the exhaustion in Amara's eyes late at night. And even as a child, Zara understood that their life was different from most families. But there was always one question that never fully disappeared: her father. Amara rarely spoke about him, and when she did, her answers were always short, careful, incomplete. For years, Zara accepted those answers, until one afternoon changed everything. It happened on a quiet weekend while Amara was at work. Zara had been cleaning their small apartment when she opened an old storage box tucked deep inside a closet. Inside were things she had never seen before: old photographs, yellowed envelopes, letters written in handwriting she didn't recognize. Curious, she began reading. The more she read, the more confused she became. The letters spoke about dreams, business ideas, the future, and one name appeared again and again: David. At first, the name meant nothing, but then Zara noticed something else. One of the old photos showed her mother standing beside a young man she had never seen before. He looked confident, ambitious, and strangely familiar. That night, Unable to ignore her curiosity, Zara searched the name she had seen in the letters, David Okoye. Within seconds, the internet filled with headlines, business magazines, television interviews, global conferences. The same face from the photograph now appeared on the covers of international business publications. The man in those old photos wasn't just anyone. He was one of the most powerful entrepreneurs in Africa. Zara stared at the screen in disbelief. Shock rushed through her first, then anger, then a deep, unsettling confusion. All those years her mother had struggled, while the man responsible for their lives had built a billion-dollar empire. And suddenly, everything about her past felt different. Because while David Okoye had been building his fortune, his reputation, and his global empire, his daughter had been growing up without him. And from that moment forward, Zara started watching him, quietly, patiently. She followed every interview, every public speech, every article about his success, social media, business news, corporate announcements. From a distance, she studied the man who had once walked away from her life, day after day, year after year. Because while David Okoye was building a billion-dollar empire, his daughter was building something else, a quiet storm.
As the years passed, Zara changed. The confused teenager who had first discovered her father's identity slowly grew into someone very different. Stronger, calmer, more focused. She poured her energy into her education. While other students chased popularity or distractions, Zara spent her time learning, observing, and preparing herself for the future she knew she would eventually face. Because deep down, one thought never left her mind. One day, she would confront the man who abandoned her. But Zara was patient. She didn't act out of anger. She didn't send emotional messages or try to contact him impulsively. Instead, she watched. She studied the world her father lived in, the conferences he attended, the interviews he gave, the charities he supported. From the outside, David Okoye's life looked flawless. A global entrepreneur, a respected leader, a man admired by millions. But Zara understood something most people didn't. Behind that powerful reputation was a story no one had ever heard, and she was the only person who could tell it. So she waited. Years passed. Her understanding grew deeper. Her emotions became quieter, but stronger. Because Zara didn't want revenge, she didn't want money, she didn't want to destroy her father's empire. What she wanted was something much simpler: the truth. And she wanted that truth revealed in front of the entire world. Then one day, the opportunity finally appeared. News spread across business media that David Okoye would be receiving a major international award at an exclusive leadership summit. The event would be broadcast globally. Influential guests would attend: journalists, investors, business leaders from around the world. For most people, it was simply another celebration of David Okoye's success. But for Zara, it was the moment she had been waiting for. Without telling anyone her true reason, she registered for the event. And on the night of the ceremony, she walked into the same room where the man who had shaped her entire life was about to give the biggest speech of his career.
The ballroom was silent, except for the sound of applause. David Okoye stood confidently on stage, the golden award resting in his hand as cameras flashed from every corner of the room. The host stepped aside, giving him the microphone. David smiled the way he always did in front of an audience, calm, composed, completely in control. "Success," he began, his voice steady and practiced, "is not just about wealth or recognition. It's about legacy, about the impact we leave on the people around us, about family, responsibility, and the choices we make that shape the future." The audience listened closely. Some nodded. Others lifted their phones to record the speech. From the outside, it was the perfect moment, the perfect story, the perfect man. But near the back of the ballroom, Zara sat quietly in her chair, listening to every word. Her heart was beating faster now, not from fear, from certainty. For 22 years she had imagined this moment, and now it was finally here. David continued speaking about leadership and sacrifice, completely unaware that the one chapter of his life he had tried to erase was sitting only a few meters away. Then suddenly, a chair moved. Zara stood up. At first, no one noticed, but when she began walking slowly toward the front of the room, several guests turned their heads. The soft sound of her heels echoed against the polished floor. David paused mid-sentence. His eyes followed the movement. Confusion flickered across his face. The room slowly grew quiet. Then Zara stopped just a few steps away from the stage. Her voice was calm, clear, steady. "Mr. Okoye?" David looked down at her, still unsure what was happening. Then she asked a single question. "Do you remember a woman named Amara?" The words seemed to freeze the air. For a moment, David didn't move. The confident expression on his face slowly disappeared. The name hit him like a memory he had spent decades trying to bury. Around the room, guests looked at each other in confusion. Whispers began spreading through the crowd. But Zara wasn't finished. Her eyes never left his. "Because she never forgot you," she said quietly. "And neither did the daughter you left behind." The room fell completely silent. The camera stopped flashing. The applause that had filled the ballroom only minutes earlier had vanished. On stage, David Okoye stood frozen. The award in his hand suddenly felt heavier, because in that moment, he finally understood who was standing in front of him. And with that realization came a wave of emotions he could no longer hide. Shock, shame, and a crushing guilt that had been waiting 22 years to catch up with him. For several long seconds, David Okoye said nothing. The microphone remained in his hand, but the confident businessman the audience had been listening to only moments earlier was gone. In his place stood a man facing a past he had spent 22 years trying to forget. His eyes remained fixed on Zara, and in that moment, he saw it. The resemblance, the same eyes he had once seen in Amara, the same quiet strength. A realization slowly settled over him. This wasn't just a stranger making an accusation. This was the consequence of a decision he had made decades ago. Around the ballroom, whispers grew louder. Journalists exchanged confused glances. Guests looked between David and the young woman standing in front of the stage. But David barely noticed the crowd anymore. His voice, when it finally came, was no longer confident. It was quiet, unsteady. "Zara," he said slowly, the name unfamiliar yet painfully real on his tongue. For the first time in his carefully controlled life, David Okoye looked completely unprepared. He stepped forward slightly, gripping the microphone tighter. "I didn't know," he began, his voice heavy with regret. "I didn't know what happened after I left. I didn't know there was a child." The words felt weak even as he said them, because deep down he knew the truth. Not knowing was never the same as trying to find out. The room remained silent as David took a slow breath. Then, in front of the entire audience, the billionaire lowered his head. "I spent my life building companies," he admitted quietly. "Building wealth, building influence, building a reputation." His eyes lifted again toward Zara. "But somewhere along the way, I abandoned the one responsibility that should have mattered the most." For the first time that night, the powerful man the world admired looked genuinely human. "I can't change what I did, and I can't erase the years you grew up without me." The room remained still. "But if there is any chance," he said softly, any chance at all to make things right, I want to try." Zara stood silently, absorbing the moment she had imagined for most of her life. The truth was finally out. The man who had once walked away could no longer pretend the past didn't exist. And for David Okoye, the realization had come too late. Because for 22 years, he had been building a powerful legacy the world admired. But in a single moment, he understood the one thing he had truly lost.
Sometimes the world measures success with numbers: money, power, reputation. And by those standards, David Okoye had achieved everything most people could only dream of. He built companies that changed industries. He created opportunities for thousands of people. He became a symbol of ambition and success across continents. But life has a different way of measuring a man's legacy. Because while David was building an empire the world could see, there was a part of his story he had tried to erase. A decision made in fear, a responsibility he chose to walk away from. And for 22 years, he believed that chapter of his life had disappeared forever. But time has a strange way of holding on to the truth. It waits quietly, patiently, until the moment when the past finally stands in front of you, looking you directly in the eyes. Because success can hide many secrets, but time has a way of bringing the truth back, especially when the truth has been watching you grow.